He wasn't supposed to make it through the night. The rain poured relentlessly over the streets of Charleston, the kind of storm that turned gutters into rushing rivers and made every shadow look alive. Water hissed along the edges of the storm drain, carrying debris and leaves, the scent of wet asphalt mixing with the metallic tang of the city's drainage system. Sergeant Daniel Hayes walked briskly down the empty sidewalk, his boots splashing through puddles that reflected the fractured glow of streetlights above. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of rain-soaked pine from a nearby park, and a distant roll of thunder vibrated through the buildings, echoing like a warning. As he passed a down-street sign, something small and white flickered at the edge of his vision. He froze, squinting through the sheets of rain, ears straining against the wind. There, caught in the swirl of water at the mouth of a storm drain, a white German shepherd pup, trembling, its coat plastered to its body, claws scratching futilely against the slick metal, barely keeping its head above the churning current. Daniel's breath hitched. He could see the faint flicker of amber in the pup's eyes, wide, desperate, almost pleading. He crouched, careful not to slip, and the smell of wet fur and fear reached him like a wave, sharp and urgent. "Easy, buddy. I've got you," he murmured, his voice barely carrying over the roar of the storm. His gloved hands reached down, fingers brushing against cold metal and slick fur, and he felt the slight twitch of a paw, a signal of life, however faint. Ghost, he would later call him, and in that instant, he was more than fur and bone. He was a being clinging to hope, his small heartbeat a fragile drum beneath the roar of the rain. Daniel shifted his weight carefully, planting his boots against the wet concrete to anchor himself, the water seeping into the fabric of his uniform, chilling him, but his focus remained entirely on the pup. The wind tore at his jacket, and the streetlight above flickered, casting long, trembling shadows across the drain and the surrounding pavement. Every sound was amplified: the gurgle of water, the faint cries of the pup, the hiss of the wind through the eaves. He leaned further, gripping the edge of the storm drain with one hand while curling the other around Ghost's torso, feeling the wet shiver ripple through him. For a moment, time seemed suspended, a stillness at the center of chaos, where only Marine and K-9 existed, locked in a quiet battle against nature and circumstance. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, revealing the pup's soaked coat, the tremor of its muscles, and the glint of rain on the metal grate. Daniel whispered, "Hold on, just a little longer," and the words were carried away instantly by the wind. The pup's paw twitched again, a tiny, defiant signal of life that set a spark of hope alight in Daniel's chest. He shifted his grip, bracing himself against the slick surface, and carefully lifted, feeling the weight, the wet warmth, and the pulse beneath his hands. Ghost coughed, water dripping from his fur, eyes wide but alive, and Daniel eased him up and out of the drain, pressing him close to shield him from the torrent. The city's storm continued unabated, rain streaking over their shoulders, yet in that small pocket of rescue, the world narrowed to two: the Marine and the K-9, a connection forged not in words but in instinct and trust. He could feel the rapid rise and fall of Ghost's chest, the faint warmth returning to his soaked body, and in that simple motion, a small miracle whispered itself into the chaos of the storm, a promise of survival, a spark of hope amidst the relentless dark. Daniel tightened his hold, whispering soft assurances, the sound nearly lost to the wind, but somehow enough for Ghost to sense that he was no longer alone, that he had been found, and that in this storm, in this city, a guardian had arrived to stand with him against the night. Daniel carried Ghost against his chest as the storm pressed harder around them, each gust of wind pushing sheets of rain across the empty street like gray curtains being torn from the sky. The little K-9 did not struggle. He only trembled, his white fur clinging to his narrow frame, his breath coming in quick, uneven pulls that Daniel could feel through the front of his soaked uniform. The Marine moved fast but carefully, one arm locked beneath the dog's ribs, the other hand shielding the small head from the rain. Water ran down Daniel's face and into his collar. His boots slipped twice on the curb, but he never loosened his hold. Across the street, the small awning of a closed pharmacy flickered beneath a failing sign, and Daniel headed for it, as if it were a lighthouse. Under the awning, the sound of the rain changed. It became louder and softer at the same time, pounding above them while the narrow strip of dry concrete offered just enough shelter to breathe. Daniel lowered himself to one knee and laid Ghost gently on his folded jacket, keeping one hand against the dog's side. "Stay with me," he said, low and steady. "You hear me, little man? Stay with me." Ghost's eyes fluttered, amber, clouded by fear, but open. Daniel pulled off one glove with his teeth and placed 2 fingers beneath the dog's jaw, searching for a pulse. It was there, faint, fast, fragile as a candle in bad weather. He exhaled through his nose, slow, the way he had learned overseas when panic tried to climb into the chest. The street around them was deserted except for the red blink of a traffic light swinging over the intersection and the silver rush of water along the gutter. Somewhere far away, a car alarm chirped once and died. Daniel reached for the small emergency kit clipped inside his truck pouch, the one he carried out of habit even on nights when he was not on duty. Habit had saved men before. Tonight, maybe it would save a dog. He took out a thermal blanket, shook it open, and wrapped it around Ghost's wet body, rubbing gently through the thin silver layer to bring back warmth. The dog's paw moved again, almost nothing, just a tiny press against Daniel's wrist. But it hit him harder than thunder. It was not strength. It was trust. Daniel looked down at that paw, pale against his dark hand, and something old shifted inside him. He remembered another storm, years before, outside Camp Lejeune, when he had stood under a training shelter beside a black and tan K9 named Bishop. Bishop had been Daniel's first partner, not officially his, not on paper, but everyone knew. The dog chose him. Bishop had a way of leaning against Daniel's knee whenever the world got too loud. After Daniel came home from his second deployment, that steady weight had kept him grounded when sleep became thin and memories came too quickly. Then Bishop was retired, adopted by a handler in another state, and Daniel told everyone he was fine with it. He was a Marine. Marines adapted. But some absences do not leave loudly. They sit quietly in the corner of a room and wait. Ghost coughed weakly, pulling Daniel back to the wet sidewalk, the pharmacy awning, the storm-dark street. Daniel bent closer. "That is it," he whispered. "Fight me if you have to. Just keep breathing." He checked the dog's mouth, cleared water from the muzzle with careful fingers, then kept rubbing along the ribs in slow, firm motions. Not frantic, never rough, just steady, like warming a frozen hand. Ghost made a small sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a cry. Daniel paused. The sound carried a question no language could hold. Why did they leave me? Daniel did not know the answer. Maybe there was no answer good enough. Maybe cruelty was just emptiness wearing a human face. But he knew what came next. He pulled out his phone, the screen slicked beneath his thumb, and called the nearest emergency animal clinic. The line crackled once before a woman answered, her voice alert despite the hour. Daniel gave his name, location, and the condition in clipped, calm words. The clinic was 3 miles away, open all night. He could make it if the roads held. When he ended the call, Ghost was staring at him. Not fully awake, not safe yet, but there. Daniel slipped his arms beneath the dog again and lifted him with the same care he would give a sleeping child. The white head rolled against his shoulder. The paw that had moved in the drain rested now against Daniel's chest, just above the place where his own heart beat hard and steady. "All right, Ghost," Daniel murmured, naming him without planning to. "We are not losing you in the rain." The moment he said the name, the dog gave the smallest breath, deeper than the last, as if some hidden part of him had heard it and decided to stay. Daniel adjusted the strap of his backpack, pressing Ghost closer to his chest as he stepped off the sidewalk and onto the quieter street leading toward the emergency animal clinic. Rainwater pooled in uneven cracks, each step a careful negotiation to keep balance and maintain grip on the small K9. Ghost's body was warm against Daniel's jacket, but every so often a shiver ran along his spine, and Daniel could feel the tiny tremors through the damp fabric. The streetlights reflected in puddles like fractured mirrors, casting streaks of yellow across the wet asphalt, and the occasional flash of lightning lit the clouds from behind, revealing their swollen, dark shapes. He moved steadily, but with urgency, the clinic 3 blocks ahead, a beacon of hope just visible through the haze of rain. The wind pushed against his back, bending the trees along the curb, and water spattered across his face and into his eyes, stinging, yet he did not flinch. His boots splashed through puddles, sending up arcs of cold water, but he felt only Ghost's small heartbeat against him, a fragile drum keeping pace with his own. He glanced down to see the pup lift a tiny head, amber eyes focusing on him, as if questioning the distance and asking silently whether they would make it. Daniel whispered, "We are almost there, just a little further," and the sound of his voice was swallowed by the storm, yet somehow enough to reach the pup's ears. The clinic's front door appeared ahead, a warm yellow glow spilling onto the wet sidewalk, promising shelter, warmth, and care. Daniel quickened his pace, knees aching, water flowing down his collar and soaking through his pants, but he did not stop. He felt the weight of responsibility settle like a stone in his chest, pressing him forward. As they approached, he could see the outline of the clinic receptionist moving behind a fogged window, the figure raising a hand in recognition or curiosity. Daniel called out over the patter of rain, "I need help. My dog, he is in shock. Please, someone help him." The door opened with a soft push, and a gust of warm air carrying the scent of antiseptic and towels met them. Daniel stepped inside, the contrast from the storm outside immediate, and he lowered Ghost gently onto a thick blanket on the clinic floor, keeping one hand lightly resting on his back. The pup shivered, small paws flexing, and Daniel kept murmuring soft assurances, calm and steady, allowing the warmth of the room and the gentle touch to encourage him to relax slightly. The clinic lights reflected off the wet fur, highlighting the silvery strands along the pup's back and the deep, trusting amber of his eyes as he turned them toward Daniel. A veterinary nurse arrived, moving quickly but softly, assessing the tiny body, checking breathing and heart rate, and Daniel watched, hands still on Ghost, feeling a pulse beneath his fingers, steadying, small, but alive. He felt relief in increments, like warmth seeping back through frozen ground. Every breath the pup took a small victory. The storm continued outside, but within the clinic, time slowed, reduced to the rhythm of care, breath, and cautious hope. Daniel stayed with Ghost, speaking quietly, describing each sound, each step of the nurse, so the pup knew that the world was safe, that they were no longer alone. Ghost moved slightly, leaning into Daniel's chest, paw pressing softly against his jacket, as if acknowledging the protection offered, a subtle miracle in motion. Every small twitch, every faint whimper, became a reassurance that life persisted despite the night's ordeal, and Daniel held on to that signal, the tiniest act of trust exchange between human and dog in a world otherwise ruled by storm, wind, and water. The warmth from the blankets spread slowly across Ghost's body, his breathing lengthening, sighs mingling with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant dripping of water from the clinic's roof. Daniel continued murmuring softly, his voice a tether between fear and hope, between cold streets and the first hint of dawn, a presence both anchor and guardian, ensuring that the pup understood that survival was possible, that courage and patience had carried them through the worst, and that they were finally, truly safe. The veterinary nurse moved with practiced calm, but Daniel noticed the slight tightening around her eyes as she wrapped a warm towel over Ghost's shoulders and checked the small monitor beside him. Her name tag read Emily Carter, and she spoke in the low, steady voice of someone who understood that frightened animals heard emotion before they heard words. "His temperature is still low," she said gently, "but he is responding. That paw movement you saw out there may have been the reason he held on long enough." Daniel stood beside the exam table, water dripping from the hem of his uniform jacket onto the clean tile floor, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles ached. He wanted to ask if Ghost would live, but the question stayed behind his teeth. Some questions were too heavy to put into a room. Instead, he watched the rise and fall of the white canine's ribs beneath the blanket. Small rise, small fall, a fragile rhythm, a promise not yet broken. A veterinarian entered moments later, a woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled back beneath a blue scrub cap, and tired eyes made kind by long nights. "I am Dr. Rachel Monroe," she said, glancing from Daniel to Ghost. "You brought him in?" Daniel nodded. "Found him near a storm drain off Meeting Street. He was caught in the water. I do not know how long he had been there." Dr. Monroe's face softened, not with pity, but with recognition. She had seen enough abandoned animals to know when a story had been written by human neglect and answered by mercy. "You did the right thing," she said. Then she leaned over Ghost, warming her stethoscope between her palms before placing it against his chest. The room fell silent except for the hum of the heater and the rain tapping against the windows. Ghost's eyes opened halfway. He looked past the doctor, past the bright light above him, and found Daniel. The Marine took one step closer. "I am right here," he whispered. "You are doing good." The dog's ear twitched. It was barely a movement, but Daniel saw it. Emily saw it too, and her mouth curved into the smallest smile. Dr. Monroe checked his gums, listened to his breathing, and ran careful hands over his legs and paws. There was no panic in her touch, no rushing, only attention. "He is exhausted," she said, "cold, frightened, and dehydrated. But I do not see signs that he is beyond help." Daniel let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. It left him slowly, almost painfully, as if the storm had been sitting inside his lungs. "So he has a chance?" he asked. Dr. Monroe looked at him directly. "Yes, he has a chance, but the next few hours matter." The words settled over Daniel like a command. Not a guarantee, a mission. He pulled a chair close to the exam table and sat down without asking. No one told him to leave. Maybe they saw the way Ghost's breathing steadied whenever Daniel spoke. Maybe they understood that rescue did not end at the door. Emily placed a dry towel over Daniel's shoulders, and for the first time since the drain, he noticed how cold he was. His hands trembled slightly as he rubbed them together. The clinic lights were warm but too bright, shining over silver instruments, folded blankets, bottles of saline, and the little white dog who looked almost unreal beneath them, like a piece of moonlight pulled from floodwater. Ghost shifted, weakly lifting his paw until it slipped from the blanket and rested against the edge of the table. Daniel reached out and touched it with 2 fingers. The paw was damp, trembling, alive. "You keep doing that," Daniel murmured. "You keep moving, and I will keep staying." Dr. Monroe began the first round of care, warming him slowly, giving fluids carefully, checking every response while the storm kept pressing against the glass. Outside, Charleston seemed swallowed by rain. Inside, the room grew quiet with purpose. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. Whoever needed him could wait. Ghost could not. The dog made a soft sound, a thin breath that curled into the air like a question. Daniel leaned closer, his voice dropping until it was almost part of the heater's hum. "I know," he said. "People failed you tonight. But that is not the end of your story." Ghost blinked once, slow and heavy. Then, with effort so small it might have gone unseen by anyone else, he pressed his palm more firmly against Daniel's fingers. Not strong, not healed, but present. Daniel bowed his head over that touch, rainwater still cooling at the back of his neck, and for a moment the old ache inside him grew quiet. He had walked through many storms in his life, some under foreign skies, some inside his own chest, but this one had led him here, to a trembling white K9 on an exam table, to a heartbeat trying to remain in the world. And in that quiet clinic, while thunder rolled farther away over the city, Daniel understood something he had not expected. Sometimes a life does not ask to be saved with a shout. Sometimes it asks with one moving paw. By midnight, the storm had softened into a steady rain, but the clinic still carried the feeling of a place holding its breath. The lights above the treatment room hummed softly. The heater pushed warm air through the vents. Somewhere beyond the closed door, a phone rang once, then stopped. Daniel sat beside Ghost with his forearms resting on his knees, his damp uniform slowly drying in uneven patches, his eyes fixed on the small white K9 curled beneath the heated blanket. Dr. Monroe had moved him from the main exam table to a padded recovery bed near the wall, where the light was lower and the noise softer. She said rest mattered now. Warmth mattered. Patience mattered. Daniel understood all three, but patience had never felt so hard. Ghost slept in short, uneasy stretches, each breath shallow at first, then deeper, then shallow again. Every time his chest paused for half a second too long, Daniel leaned forward. Every time the dog sighed, Daniel breathed with him. Emily Carter came in with a paper cup of coffee and set it on the small counter beside him. "You should drink something," she said. "You are shaking." Daniel looked down at his hands, surprised to see she was right. "I am fine," he answered. Emily gave him the kind of look nurses give men who mistake stubbornness for strength. That is what people say when they are not. Daniel almost smiled, but it did not quite reach his face. He picked up the cup anyway. The coffee was bitter and too hot, but it brought feeling back to his fingers. Ghost stirred at the sound of the paper cup crinkling. His eyes opened, dim but searching, until they found Daniel again. The Marine leaned closer. "Still here," he said. "I told you." Ghost blinked slowly. Then his nose twitched once, catching Daniel's scent through the clean smell of blankets, medicine, rainwater, and coffee. That small movement seemed to loosen something in the room. Emily checked the monitor and nodded toward the numbers. "He is warming up. Not fast, but in the right direction." Daniel held on to those words like a rope. Not fast, but in the right direction. It sounded like every hard road he had ever survived. A little after 12:30, Dr. Monroe returned with a clipboard tucked under one arm. Her expression was careful, which made Daniel sit straighter. "His breathing has improved," she said, "and his heart sounds better than when he arrived. But he is not out of danger yet. We need to keep watching for delayed stress from the cold and the water." Daniel nodded once. "Whatever he needs." "There is something else," she said. She crouched near Ghost and gently lifted the edge of the blanket just enough to look at the collar mark around his neck. No collar remained, only a faint line pressed into the fur where one had been. He may have belonged to someone, or someone wanted people to think he did not. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low. "Can you check for a microchip?" "We already did," Dr. Monroe said. "There is one." The room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but Daniel felt it, like a door opening somewhere behind him. Emily looked at the doctor. Daniel looked at Ghost. The dog was asleep again, unaware that the small piece of information inside him might lead back to the people who had failed him. Dr. Monroe continued gently. "The chip is registered to a private security training kennel outside Mount Pleasant. I left a message with the number listed, but no one has answered. It is late, and the weather may have affected service. We will document everything properly." Daniel looked toward the rain-streaked window. Mount Pleasant was not far. Across the bridge, past the marshes, past the places where expensive houses sat high above the floodwater. He pictured Ghost in a clean yard once, maybe wearing a proper collar, learning commands, watching human hands for kindness. Then he looked at the trembling dog on the recovery bed and felt the picture break. "He was trained?" Daniel asked. "Most likely," Dr. Monroe said. "His teeth, posture, and muscle tone suggest working dog lines. He is young, maybe 3 years old, and even frightened, he responds to calm human presence. That usually means someone taught him trust before someone else damaged it." Daniel swallowed. He did not like the word damaged. It sounded too final. Ghost was not damaged. Ghost was wounded, and wounds could close. At least some of them. Daniel reached out and laid his hand near the dog's paw without touching it, letting Ghost choose. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the paw slid forward under the blanket and rested against Daniel's fingers again. Emily turned away, pretending to check supplies. Dr. Monroe stood very still. Daniel lowered his voice. "You hear that, boy? They found your name somewhere in a machine, but I know the name you answered to tonight." Ghost's breathing deepened, soft and raspy, but steady. Outside, the rain thinned against the glass. Inside, the clinic held its quiet vigil. A Marine with tired eyes. A white K9 wrapped in warmth. A mystery waiting beyond the storm. And between them, a promise neither one had spoken aloud, but both seemed to understand. Whoever had left Ghost behind had written the first part of the night. They would not write the ending. The call from Mount Pleasant came at 1:17 in the morning, just as the last hard edge of the storm began to loosen over Charleston. Daniel heard the clinic phone ring behind the front desk, heard Emily answer in a quiet professional voice, then heard the silence that followed stretch a little too long. Ghost was sleeping, his white muzzle resting against the blanket, one paw still touching the back of Daniel's hand. The warmth had brought color back to the inside of his ears, and his breathing had settled into a slow, careful rhythm. Daniel did not move. He watched Emily through the open doorway as she wrote something down, her face growing still. When she hung up, she did not come back right away. She went to Dr. Monroe first. They spoke near the medicine cabinet in. Voices low enough that only fragments drifted across the room. Registered owner. Training contract. Reported missing. Not tonight. Daniel felt the muscles in his shoulders tighten. Dr. Monroe finally returned with the clipboard held close to her chest. Emily followed, her expression gentle but troubled. Daniel looked from one to the other. "Say it plain," he said. Dr. Monroe nodded, respecting the request. "The kennel says Ghost was sold 6 months ago to a couple in North Charleston. They reported him missing 4 days ago." Daniel looked down at the dog. 4 days. The number landed softly, but it carried weight. 4 days of rain, clouds gathering. 4 days of hunger, cold, fear, and nobody knowing where he was. Or nobody wanting to say. "Did they ask how he is?" Daniel asked. Emily looked at the floor. That was answer enough. Dr. Monroe spoke carefully. "They asked whether there would be a fee to release him." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he kept his hand still so Ghost would not wake to anger. The room seemed colder for a moment despite the heater. Outside, rain ticked softly along the window glass, no longer a roar, just a tired whisper. Daniel had known people could fail animals. He had seen enough forgotten dogs behind fences, enough scared eyes in shelters, enough small bodies flinching from sudden sounds. But there was something about Ghost that made the failure feel personal. Maybe it was the way he kept reaching for Daniel's hand. Maybe it was the quiet dignity in him, even frightened. Maybe it was the old truth that the vulnerable reveal who people really are. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. Dr. Monroe took a slow breath. "We document his condition. Animal control has to be notified. Because he was found in a dangerous situation and came in with signs of prolonged exposure, they will open a welfare review. Until then, he stays here under medical hold." Daniel nodded. Procedure mattered. Paperwork mattered. It was not the dramatic kind of justice. It was slower, cleaner. It built a wall 1 brick at a time. "And if those people come for him?" he asked. Dr. Monroe met his eyes. "They will not take him tonight. Not from this clinic. Not in this condition." Something in Daniel's chest eased, but only a little. Ghost stirred as if he had felt the shift. His eyes opened halfway, cloudy with exhaustion. He made a low sound, thin and uncertain. Daniel turned back to him immediately, lowering his voice. "Easy, boy. You are safe." Ghost lifted his head an inch, then dropped it again, too tired to do more. But his paw pressed harder against Daniel's hand, and Daniel answered by curling his fingers gently around it. No force. Just presence. Dr. Monroe watched them for a moment, then said, "He trusts you." Daniel gave a small breath that might have become a laugh on another night. "He does not know me. Sometimes they know enough." The words stayed in the room after she left. Daniel sat with them as the clock moved past 2, then 3. The clinic grew quieter. Emily dimmed the hallway lights. A small gray cat recovering from surgery slept in a kennel near the back. A golden retriever with a bandaged foot sighed in its crate. Life, in all its bruised forms, kept breathing under one roof. Daniel should have been exhausted, but sleep would not come. He looked at Ghost and thought of Bishop again, the old K9 who had taught him that silence could be loyalty, that healing did not always announce itself. Bishop had once sat beside Daniel through an entire night after a bad dream, not barking, not demanding, just staying. Daniel had not understood then how sacred that kind of staying could be. Now Ghost was giving him the chance to return it. Near 4 in the morning, Dr. Monroe came back for another check. She listened to Ghost's heart, watched his breathing, and smiled for the first time in hours. "Better," she said. One word. A sunrise before the sun. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, bowed his head, and whispered, "Thank you." He did not say to whom. Maybe to the doctor. Maybe to God. Maybe to the small white dog who had kept fighting when no one would have blamed him for letting go. Ghost opened his eyes at the sound and looked at him. Really looked, no longer only afraid, no longer only lost. For a few seconds, the clinic disappeared. There was no storm, no phone call, no cruel history waiting to be sorted out by reports and signatures. There was only a Marine and a K9 in the thin blue hour before dawn, both carrying wounds no one could fully see, both still here. Then Ghost moved his paw again, slowly, deliberately, and placed it on Daniel's wrist as if making his own report. Alive. Present. Not finished. Morning light filtered through the clinic windows, pale and tentative, casting long, soft lines across the recovery room, where Ghost lay resting on the thick blanket. Daniel remained seated beside him, hands cupped around the small paw, feeling its warmth and the steady rhythm of life beneath his fingers. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, the streets glistening wet under the early light, the smell of pine and wet asphalt rising faintly through the partially open window. Ghost stirred, stretching slightly, the blanket rustling beneath him, and for a moment, Daniel felt the fragile weight of survival, each movement a small triumph over the night. Emily Carter entered quietly, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a clipboard with the night's notes, and she set the cup down on the counter without breaking the stillness that had settled in the room. Dr. Monroe followed, speaking softly to Emily about the next steps, but their voices were muffled, part of the background hum rather than the focus. Daniel leaned closer to Ghost, murmuring in a low tone, "You made it through. You are here." The small dog blinked, amber eyes catching the light, and shifted, nudging against Daniel's hand in a gesture almost imperceptible but full of trust. Daniel could feel every breath, every pulse, and in that quiet, he recognized the bond that had formed in the storm, in the struggle, in the silent prayers whispered under rain and darkness. Hours passed slowly, each minute marked by gentle movements, the sound of the heater, the occasional drip from the ceiling, and the soft footsteps of the nurses checking vital signs. Ghost's chest rose and fell in steadier patterns, small victories noted in the clinic log and in the subtle, almost imperceptible sighs of relief from Daniel. The first hint of sun glimmered along the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected on the wet streets below. Daniel allowed himself to exhale fully for the first time in what felt like endless hours, the tension in his shoulders loosening as he adjusted Ghost slightly, ensuring the blanket remained snug around his small body. He spoke softly again, words meant for comfort. "No one can take this from you now. Not tonight. You are safe." Ghost responded with a slow blink, paw resting gently over Daniel's fingers as if acknowledging the promise. Outside the clinic, birds began to call faintly through the thinning mist, the sound delicate, almost a whisper against the city's backdrop. Daniel felt the moment settle, a pause in time where storm and fear had no place, only presence, only recovery. The staff moved quietly, tending to other animals with careful attention, but their presence did not disturb the fragile cocoon that had formed around the Marine and the K9. Each check, each adjustment, each careful measurement of temperature, heart rate, and hydration became part of a rhythm, a song of life that Daniel could follow through his whispered reassurances and gentle touch. Ghost shifted once more, lifting his head slightly to nuzzle Daniel's wrist, a simple movement that carried the weight of gratitude, trust, and the beginning of healing. Daniel rested his forehead lightly against the small canine's temple, feeling the warmth, feeling the breath, feeling the undeniable truth that a life had been saved, that perseverance, attention, and quiet care had pulled another being back from the brink. The soft hum of the clinic, the light from the rising sun, the distant drip of rainwater, and the measured steps of nurses combined into a calm symphony around them, a backdrop to the subtle miracle that had occurred. Daniel whispered again, "We will face the day together, buddy." And Ghost, eyes half-lidded but attentive, pressed his paw a little firmer, a gentle heartbeat against Daniel's own, confirming the connection forged in struggle, and the small but profound victory of survival that neither would forget. By mid-morning, the storm had faded into a gentle drizzle, the streets of Charleston glistening with the lingering rain. Daniel remained seated beside Ghost, now alert and shifting lightly beneath the blanket, his small body gathering strength with every breath. The room carried the faint warmth of sunlight diffused through clouds, brushing over the white fur of the K9 and highlighting the subtle patterns along his shoulders. Daniel watched the rise and fall of the dog's chest, each movement steadying, each breath a quiet victory. Dr. Monroe entered carrying a clipboard, her voice calm but firm. "We are going to start low-level care now," she explained, checking vitals and making notes. Daniel nodded, his hand resting on Ghost's side, fingers brushing the damp fur that was gradually drying. Emily Carter returned with a bowl of water and some soft food, placing them gently near the blanket without disturbing the dog. Ghost sniffed the edge of the dish and then looked up at Daniel, amber eyes filled with cautious curiosity. "Take your time," Daniel murmured. "You are safe here. Nothing is rushing you." The K9 hesitated, then licked at the water, a small but vital sign of returning strength. Daniel leaned back slightly, feeling the tension in his shoulders loosen, yet keeping his focus entirely on the pup, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, the tiny sounds he made with each sip. Outside, the faint sound of birds returning to the tree branches mixed with the soft drip of water from the awning, signaling the world was moving forward beyond the clinic walls. Daniel spoke softly, recounting the events to himself, as if each word could reinforce the life that had survived the storm. How the paw had twitched in the drain, how he had lifted the small body through the rushing water, how trust had been exchanged in silence. Ghost shifted closer, paw brushing against Daniel's hand again, steady, deliberate, a silent affirmation that he understood and accepted the protection offered. The warmth from the blanket, the gentle hum of the heater, and the quiet presence of Daniel combined into a cocoon of safety around the dog. Dr. Monroe checked the monitor and nodded, satisfied with the progress. "He is improving," she said. "We will continue to monitor, but he is responding as expected. The small tremors you saw earlier were a sign he is fighting back, and now the rhythm is more consistent." Daniel felt a wave of relief, but tempered it with caution. Survival was not a single act. It was a chain of moments, and each one counted. Ghost shifted again, standing awkwardly on all fours, legs trembling but balanced, nose twitching as he sniffed the air of the room, taking in the sense of antiseptic, warmth, and human presence. Daniel smiled faintly, keeping his voice low. "Good boy. You are here. You are still here." Ghost pressed lightly against his chest, eyes closing briefly, then opening to meet Daniel's gaze. For a long minute, the room was quiet but full, the kind of quiet that carries the weight of both past struggle and future possibility. Outside, the morning sun broke further through the clouds, glinting off the wet pavement and reflecting on the pale water still pooled in the gutters. Daniel's gaze followed it, a slow awareness that the world had survived the night, and he had survived with Ghost. He adjusted the blanket around the dog, ensuring warmth covered every inch, fingers brushing the wet fur until it absorbed the remaining chill. The small paw moved once more, gently against Daniel's wrist, almost imperceptibly but with intent, a message from the K9. "I am alive, and I am here with you." Daniel leaned close, forehead brushing the soft white fur, whispering, "You did it. You made it." Ghost shifted his head, eyes closing fully now, chest rising and falling in a steady cadence, a sign that the fight was still present but contained. The clinic room held its quiet, the storm's echo now only a distant memory, leaving Marine and K9 in a fragile peace, bound by trust, patience, and the unspoken understanding that life, however challenged, could be reclaimed. Daniel remained in that position for some time, feeling the warmth, the weight, the heartbeat, and the small miracle that had carried them through the darkness into the soft light of day. By late morning, the clinic had settled into a quiet rhythm, punctuated only by the soft hum of machines and the occasional footsteps of staff attending to other animals. Daniel sat in the chair beside Ghost, watching the small K9 stretch and roll slightly beneath the warm blanket, the tension from the stormy night giving way to cautious comfort. Outside, sunlight spilled through the windows, painting golden streaks across the floor and highlighting the damp patches on Daniel's uniform that told the story of his journey through the rain. Ghost raised his head slowly, amber eyes meeting Daniel's with a clear, steady gaze that seemed to convey understanding, trust, and a quiet gratitude that needed no words. Daniel spoke softly, his voice low and even. "You made it through, buddy. You are here, and we are together." The small dog let out a faint, happy whine, nudging against Daniel's hand with his paw in a deliberate, gentle motion that seemed to confirm the bond formed in the shadow of the storm. Dr. Monroe returned with a chart in hand, reviewing notes from the night and checking vitals again. "His heart rate is stable, breathing is regular, and he is alert," she reported. Emily Carter adjusted the blanket around Ghost, tucking it snugly beneath his chin, and smiled at the pair in the quiet room. Daniel felt a profound relief that settled deep in his chest, a calm tempered by the long vigil and the realization that life had been safeguarded against great odds. He glanced around the clinic, noticing the soft light, the warmth of the heater, and the gentle activity of the staff, all converging to support a single, fragile life. Ghost shifted, standing awkwardly on wobbly legs, tail low but wagging slightly, sniffing the air and then leaning toward Daniel, seeking reassurance, guidance, and the continued presence of someone who had carried him through the worst. Daniel reached out, gently rubbing along the small dog's back, feeling the muscles slowly regaining tone, the pulse steady beneath his fingers. "You are stronger than you realize," he whispered. The room seemed to shrink around them, the noise of the outside world muted, leaving only Marine and K9, connected through shared ordeal and the silent language of trust. Outside, a breeze carried the faint scent of wet grass and pine, signaling that the storm had passed, that the world was ready to move forward. Daniel allowed himself to breathe fully for the first time in many hours, leaning closer to Ghost and brushing a hand across his wet fur, now drying in streaks of pale sunlight. Ghost responded with a subtle nuzzle, eyes half-lidded in contentment, paw pressing gently against Daniel's wrist, a quiet affirmation that the world, however damaged, could still offer safety, warmth, and care. Dr. Monroe and Emily moved to the back of the room to prepare for the next round of monitoring, speaking in hushed tones, and the quiet reinforced the sense of security and stability that now surrounded the K9. Daniel adjusted his position in the chair, letting his arm rest along Ghost's side, feeling the weight, the warmth, and the heartbeat, each a reminder of endurance and survival. He thought back to the storm drain, the cold, the rushing water, and the tiny paw movement that had been the first sign that life persisted. Now, with daylight filtering in, warmth in the air, and the dog alive and alert, Daniel realized that the first miracle had been followed by many small ones. Each breath, each paw movement, each soft whine, and each moment of trust was a victory. He whispered again, quietly, almost to himself, "We made it, buddy. Together." Ghost lifted his head and pressed lightly against Daniel's shoulder, eyes softening, the faintest exhalation escaping in a gentle sigh. In that quiet, the storm and the past neglect felt distant, replaced by a stillness filled with cautious hope. Daniel rested his forehead against the top of Ghost's head, feeling the pulse beneath the fur, the warmth returning to the small body, and the unspoken promise that they would face the world side by side. The room held them in that soft, suspended time, the gentle sounds of life continuing around them, and for the first time since the drain, Daniel allowed himself to imagine what could come next. Long walks in dry streets, sunlight warming white fur, the companionship of a life saved, and the enduring trust between a Marine and his K9. Ghost moved once more, paw pressing firmly against Daniel's hand, a quiet punctuation to a night of survival, a living sign of resilience, connection, and the small but profound miracles that could occur when vigilance, care, and faith intersected. Daniel leaned back slightly, letting the warmth of the morning, the quiet of the clinic, and the presence of the small white dog settle over him like a benediction, a final acknowledgement that despite storms, despite neglect, life could persist and trust could be restored, paw by paw.